Welcome back to Globe War 1939. We just finished off round 11. And yes, in fact, the conclusion of the game. The Axis were able to squeeze out 14 victory cities. So we're going with the option 3 of game completion, which is no time limit on rounds. They just need 14 cities. And they were able to capture 2 on this last round, which is even a surprise to me. I didn't even see it until I was planning out each nation's turn and seeing that there was a path forward. So let's take a look and give a breakdown of this turn. Before we do that, the economics of the game is the Axis have a combined income, and now this is territory and bonuses for all 3 Axis nations. So Italy, Germany, and Japan. They have a combined income of $280. The Allies, which is Canada, US, Britain, India, Australia, South Africa, Brazil, they have, and China, of course, they have a combined income of $213, which is a $67 difference favoring the Axis. So certainly that is quite a mountain to overcome, especially when the Allies, their combined income in the start of the game is higher than the Axis. So they were able to, right from turn 1, capture territory, build up their economies, and not really let their foot off the gas and just keep going. The Axis has certainly dictated the play of this entire game, the Allies being extremely reactionary, to the point where the Axis were even forcing the turns or forcing the Allies to make the moves that the Axis wanted them to make, just because they had them such in a tight grip, especially here in India. There were certainly a couple of times where the Indian army was boggled up in Burma. They did want to break out, but fear that if they split off any significant amount of force, then the Japanese would overcome their nation. Same thing with Cairo. There was a couple times where Cairo wanted to break out, attack the Italians, but with the Italian fleet and their transport fleet, made that almost impossible to leave without suffering major consequences. So good job on the Axis. So for this turn, the Germans are starting to build up. As you can see, the Russians are starting to make their move towards Stalingrad and Moscow to try to recapture their cities. So the Germans seeing this, they actually seen it a little too late. They should have reacted a turn prior, which is fine. They're about 2 turns away from building any kind of force to attack the Russians. So the Russians, if they had one more turn, certainly would have taken Stalingrad. That would be no issues. But all this material here would end up in this region of the map. They would utilize the trains to get some infantry. Any unit that can move 2 spaces would have just traveled on their own. They did purchase SS infantry and some more medium tanks. These Mark IVs and SS mechanized were heading down towards the Middle East, but certainly turned around to face off against the Russians. So yeah, the Germans were a turn behind of when they should have reacted, which is fine. Certainly Moscow or Stalingrad would have fallen, but I have no doubt the Germans would have recaptured that within a turn or 2. And then here the Allies did land in Bordeaux again. So this is their 3rd attempt now, combined with American and British. So the Americans landed 11 medium tanks, 2 Marines, and about 15 infantry. The British... Okay, sorry about that. It is a long weekend. I do have all 5 of my kids home. So trying to find an opportunity for everyone to be quiet to make a video is a little challenging. Anyways, The Allies did land in Brodeur. They did enter in with 11 tanks, 15 regular infantry, 2 Marines, 2 artillery. The British supplemented with 3 priests, 2 artillery, commando, 2 light tanks, 2 medium tanks, and 13 of their own infantry. So that's all in Brodeur. But the Germans in Paris have this stack here. So we got 3 heavy artillery, 2 SS infantry, 2 paratroopers, 4 SS mechanized, 2 Sturmjäger, very difficult to pronounce, 3 Tiger tanks. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 Mark V's, a stack of medium tanks, and 12 Mark IVs. And then, of course, they have their entire Air Force. The last couple turns, they have been replacing their tactical bombers that have been shot down from Yugoslavia. The Germans really didn't use their Air Force as much as other games, or where I see other people use their Air Force. They've been relying heavily on their army. Their Air Force was mainly used to make this sea zone a dead zone, preventing any Allied ships from coming in here to land in Oslo. And that was more of a scare tactic than anything. So even though they haven't been really flying around, they did use the bombers over here in a battle or two. But since turn 1, they've been just sitting there, not really doing anything. But I do feel this preventing any Allied ships in the sea zone here between Britain and Scandinavia is certainly a good use of that force. So the Germans' plan moving forward, if say this continued on for another turn or two, what their intent was, they did move the Spanish fleet out, taking advantage that they do have Gibraltar again. So they brought them up to Sea Zone 35. Their main fleet, which is in Sea Zone 17 right now, certainly too far away to reach to this Allied, but we have 4 subs, 3 destroyers, 2 cruisers, 2 coastal battleships, and a battleship, or a Bismarck. So what their intent was, and they did go ahead on their last turn, purchase 5 more subs, move it down to Sea Zone 16, so to be in range, and then the Spanish, the German, and then the German Air Force would have attacked this Allied fleet. The Germans did prep up this battle, and they did purchase 5 regular fighters to go along. So they would obviously take the hits on the fighters before their veteran fighters or the bombers or the tactical bombers. So they purchased these 5 for the sole purpose of shielding their veteran fighters. And of course, their subs are the cheapest that they can have on the map, so they'll take their hits on them first. Yeah, so that would have been their plan. If that had paid off the way the Germans expected or wanted, then you can imagine the Atlantic with all this gone. Certainly the German fleet would have been completely weakened as well. I would imagine most of it probably would have been gone. The Germans would have opted to take hits on their Navy as opposed to their Air Force. So you can imagine all these ships gone. And then the only thing would be in the sea would be this transport fleet, which wouldn't be able to get to Europe because the German Air Force would have came and attacked that. So then that would put the Americans and the British back even further, making so that they would have to rebuild their warships before they started rebuilding their transports, which would have set them back 5 turns. Certainly. So this would have been an interesting plan to see if it worked. Certainly the Allies would have seen it coming, and they could have reacted back out, add some more vessels, some more cruisers, destroyers. So would have been interesting, or move the fleet back closer to Britain to get escorts from the fighters in Britain as well. So would have been interesting. Too bad we never got that far. For in the Pacific, the Japanese did after breaking out from Siam into Burma, they just each turn just took one territory at a time. They did come into Calcutta and destroying that. So essentially, India is now out of the game. They only have 2 infantry. They don't have an economy. They don't have a capital. So they're effectively eliminated from the game. China has been completely weakened as well. They did have a couple of their light armors that the Americans have lent them over the course of the game. The Japanese did come in and destroy 2 of those, handful of infantry. So really all they have left, they actually have the same amount of artillery, or sorry, no, the Chinese have 1 more infantry than they have artillery. So that's certainly not a good sign when the Chinese infantry corps is that low in numbers. Certainly the Japanese don't have a massive army here either. Most of their resources went in this region, but it's certainly enough to keep the Chinese at bay. Communist China did retake their territory, so their income went up by $2. And they get their bonus now because Russia is at war with Japan. So their economy, for the amount of territories that they have, is doing quite well. And Japan put most of their money into a second navy because their primary navy is tied up here off the coast of the U.S. It certainly can move away, like that's no issues, but then that gives the Americans a chance to put some ships in the water. The Japanese don't want to deal with that, so they're just park their navy here and pretty much preventing the Americans in the Pacific from doing anything at all. It would certainly be a long road to remove this fleet, build 10 fighters, attack, lose the 10 fighters, weaken the Japanese, and they'd have to continue that process for quite some time. And that's assuming that the Japanese won't supplement their losses, building at home and sailing them across. They did build 2, a tactical and a fighter. There was a cruiser up here convoying for $5. They were able to sink that with those aircraft. So this is what's on the coast of the U.S. We got 3 carriers, 3 Yamatos, 2 destroyers, and 5 cruisers. Their secondary fleet, most of the battleships were already on the map. They just redeployed them back home. They purchased 3 more cruisers, a couple more destroyers, and they got their transports now. So the plan for this, their transports would have came over, and these guys would have moved away from the coast for 1 turn to attack Hawaii, capturing that city, and then this fleet would quickly move back into Sea Zone 133. That was the plan for the transports. This fleet here, their task would have been to come down and clean up this Australian fleet that is certainly causing a lot of problems on the Japanese economy, preventing them from building up, certainly taking away a lot of money over the course of the game, which is kind of the Japanese fault. They did vacate this whole area, allowing the Anzacs to actually do what they were meant to do, which is their task in the game. Their primary job, in my opinion anyways, is to take these islands and take them away from the Japanese, stifling their economy, allowing the Americans some breathing room. But this is certainly a classic game of what can the Americans actually do. Do they go all in on the Pacific, all in on the Atlantic? This game, like I've played previous games where they went all in on the Atlantic. The Germans fell. It worked out very well. The Japanese was certainly a beast of a nation because they really had no opposition. This one, they kind of split their economy. The first part of the game, they were putting most of their money in the Pacific. And of course, that didn't really work out very well. And then the second half, they put all their money into the Atlantic. So it's, in my opinion, you got to do one or the other. If you're splitting your income, even though the Americans, after bonuses, they make over $100 just off their base income. That's without getting Brazil involved, without getting Mexico involved, capturing any more territory. They're well over $100. But if you're putting 50 and 50, it's not enough. You need to put all or nothing. Because the Axis in the Europe side or the Pacific side are just too strong just to split that up. If you agree, disagree, let me know. So, but the story of this turn, the story that actually won the game, certainly this was a massive help. I didn't expect this to go as well as it did. As you can tell, the Japanese do have quite a nice number of soldiers in Calcutta. They got 3 medium tanks. They got 6 veterans. They did lose a couple veterans in this battle, but at the end of the game, doesn't really matter. And a heavy artillery. And they do have, and of course, they utilized their Air Force. Calcutta did have an AA gun, which failed at its task to shoot down any planes. But certainly now the tanks would, if it played out, the tanks would have just cleaned up the rest of these territories. All the infantry and any unit that moves only one space would have came up into China over a course of 3 turns. So I say China would have been 3 more turns and they're done. But the story of the game, or of this turn, was, as you can tell from, or if you remember the last video, the Germans came down from the Eastern Europe through Turkey, and the surviving armor from the Battle of Moscow came down into the Middle East. The British did try to put up a defense, but they couldn't really take a lot of forces away from Calcutta. Or Cairo, sorry. They did have a fair amount split between these 2 units. Both German task force quickly swept those aside. And so they had a slew of armor ranging from medium tanks, Mark IVs, Mark Vs, couple of mechanized artillery. Very low on the infantry. They lost most of their infantry in Istanbul, and a couple of infantry in the Iraq, Syria battles. But they came down with everything. Anything that could get there, and most of this task force had movement 2, so they were easily to enter Cairo. Now, their intention was not to win the battle. Their intention was to weaken the British task force that they had there. And the Germans had no expectations of winning. However, they did, which was complete shocker. The Japanese, or the British, actually had 7 fighters there. They had a slew of infantry, some armor, a little bit of artillery. But the British did move out the bulk of their force a couple turns prior to challenge the Italians on their production facility. The Germans came in and they survived with 6 armor units. I believe it was 3 medium, 2 Mark IVs, and Mark V, I believe. But then, so the British were here in Alexandria, too far away for any of their infantry and artillery to get back in. So they dispatched all of their armor, which can move to, back into Calcutta to recapture that city. Because they looked at the map and they're like, oh my goodness, the Axis got 14 cities. We need to reduce 1 now. They had this turn. The Americans were too far out of position to take Paris. At this point, only the British were in Bordeaux, and the Americans came in and boosted them up on their turn. But they were in no position to take a city. The only city that the Allies could retake was Calcutta. So they went with all their armor. They did win that battle, but they only survived with 4 armor units, 4 medium tanks. That was it. So then the Italians, having 5 transports, grabbed whatever they could out of Italy, whatever they could out of their production facility in Africa, and because Calcutta was cut off from this fleet here, they couldn't get into the Mediterranean. The Italian fleet just came over, no problems, no resistance, and landed 10 units, and utilizing their entire Air Force of 5 units. So they just dumped 10 units plus their Air Force against the British 4 armor. They didn't stand a chance recapturing the city. So Calcutta, on 1 turn, was attacked and captured 3 times. Super exciting. So that actually, and the Italians are the last to go in the turn sequence. End of the round. Axis hold 14 victory cities. That is the game. But even before this turn, after the last video, when I started playing this turn for the Germans, I was like, okay, this game probably got. I was thinking to myself, probably 5 more turns. So I was planning ahead for at least that, trying to figure out for the Allies, the British and the Americans, thinking, okay, we got 3 turns to get to Paris, 4 turns to get to Berlin. Can we make this happen? Can we actually do this? Do we have the economy to push forward into Paris? Obviously not. But certainly the turning point in this game, even though the Germans, they attacked on turn 1, they attacked their initial cities countries right away, executing that plan fairly well, taking more losses than previous games. So after turn 1, I was looking at the German infrastructure, the units on the map, their military. I was like, oh man, this is going to be a rough game for the Axis. Most of their equipment was gone. And instead of producing a lot of more advanced weaponry, they had to spend a couple turns of just buying infantry to replace those that they lost on turn 1. But certainly attacking Russia, especially at 2 fronts. Normally, they only expected to go into the south, but being able to attack the north and the south at the same time really sped up the invasion and the conquest of the Soviet Union. As soon as Moscow fell, that was pretty much game. The Americans did start their landings, but they were actually 2 turns behind of when they should have. So in order to really help the Russians, you want your Navy, your transports, any equipment that you're going to sail over. Certainly, America needs to be in the war for this to actually work properly. But as soon as the Germans go into Russia, you want to start landing into Paris. And if you're not ready to land into Paris, Russia is doomed. And if Russia goes, then the Germans have no more enemies to fight on land. They're going to start pumping all their money into France, in their Navy, Air Force, and then it's the American and the British are certainly going to have a lot of trouble knocking on the door of Europe. And then once they freed up, once the Russians were gone, they freed up all this equipment, a slew of tanks and armor, mechanized. They just turned around and headed for France, came down south to help out the Italians. Yeah. The only other really exciting parts outside of Cairo and India for this turn was the Americans came down. They brought up their transports from the previous turn, landed in Sea Zone 49. The Americans put some units into Florida, and they came down and recaptured this one territory down here. So Venezuela is only down to 1 territory. Still got the 4 infantry, but certainly they would be attacked. Now the Americans would have came in with 3 armor, artillery, 2 Marines, 2 infantry. They would not stand a chance. And the Italians took over the rest of northern Africa. Yeah, so the Artemis has been signed. How each nation, if this is the way the war actually played out in reality, I would imagine most of this would have been in the peace deals. This would have given back to Spain, and Spain would have been given Portugal and Gibraltar for Iberia for their efforts. Up here in Scandinavia, Norway probably would have been given to Sweden. Finland would have got Leningrad and a chunk of territory off Russia. These 3 allied nations, Bulgaria probably would have claimed Turkey. Yugoslavia would have been claimed by Hungary. Romania probably would have claimed Ukraine, or a big chunk of it. And to fulfill, the Germans did do bulk of the work, so they probably would have claimed France, Poland, a good chunk of Russia. The Italians, of course, would have kept any holdings here. They probably would have want the Horn of Africa back. So this would have been their reward. India, in reality, I can't see the Japanese would want to govern India, so they probably would have backed out, made this a satellite state on working with the Japanese. So they would have been granted independence away from Britain, but then have to report to Tokyo. Not sure, would these islands be kept with Australia, or would they just be forced to go back to their home island and Japan reclaim these? Not really sure how that would have played out. Siam would have been gifted French Indochina, Saigon, Singapore for their contributions. Japan probably would have backed out of here, give this back to China, just to solidify, to keep the border straight. And this chunk would have been kept with the Japanese, and China would have been free to do their thing, but only half their country, as opposed to today's world. And the Soviet Union, after this type of fighting, there's no way communism would have spread the way it did. They probably would have just been kept in their own little region. And this down here, this probably would have to give all this territory back to Argentina. They certainly wouldn't be able to make a case for a claim to gain any more territory, as they really didn't do a lot. This is more of a distraction, giving more money to the Germans. And yeah, so that's probably how the territories would have broken down. Maybe. And now, here's a question. The German, like Finland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, they all get their own economy, plus providing income to their host nation. Is the same true for Spain and Sweden? I didn't play it that way. I just played it. They just got the territories. But there's certainly a case to be made. They did join on the German side as a free, independent nation with their own government. So certainly a case would have made that they would have produced their own infantry. They would have produced their own income outside of giving income to their host nation as well. And do these guys do the same thing? If that's the case, then I owe Argentina 4 infantry. I owe Spain 4 to 5. I owe Sweden 4 to 5 infantry as well. So certainly interesting question. I read through the rules. I may have missed the text that said that or defined that. Certainly let me know, please. All right. Well, thank you for watching the series, and we will start up a new game shortly. However, this game did end at the perfect time because this came in the mail today. So we got Undaunted Stalingrad, Undaunted Normandy, Undaunted Reinforcements. So the Reinforcements has a solo play for both Normandy and North Africa. That's really the only one that I'm missing now. There is a Battle of Britain, Undaunted, but I don't really have any interest in that. And this is the Stalingrad is the campaign game. Has legacy elements into it, but it's campaign. This has to be played with at least 2 people, but this can be played solo if I have to. All right. Well, again, thank you for watching, and you have yourself a great day.